Sloane coming in and talking about the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. I got a typo there in the slide. And this is going to be an incredible briefing about the attempt of some Catholic recusants to blow up King James and Parliament. If they had been successful, the world might be very different today. But their plot, which was uncovered, had a deep effect on William Shakespeare and wove its way and influence into 3 plays that he wrote that year, including King Lear, Macbeth, and Othello. So that's going to be in February. In April, we will be presenting some performance. It won't be live performance, but it will be my film, By Help of Devils, that I've been filming now since last May. This was originally supposed to be an in-person one-man show that I was going to be doing, but because of the pandemic, that's not possible. So we decided to go the route of film, since this platform works great for showing movies. So that's what we're going to do in April. And then in May, we are going to have Michelle Shoup and Corliss Preston present their program called Reimagining Shakespeare, which is how do we open up his works today to hear and experience them through a fresher lens in our rapidly changing world. So that's our coming attraction. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about our special guest tonight, Jim Sullivan. You know, about a little over 5 years ago, Dan Sullivan, who is one of our great actors that works with us all the time, came up to me really excited after one of our shows and said, Peter, you know, my brother Jim is moving back to Chicago. He's been in New York for several years directing there, and he's coming back, and he says, I think he'd be a great director for the Shakespeare Project. And I said, Dan, I know your brother. He's very, very well known, but do you think he'd really want to direct for the Shakespeare Project? He says, yeah. So I gave Jim a call, and that phone call has led now to a professional and personal relationship that's gone on now for over 5 years. Jim has been just a great friend and a mentor and director. And here's a little bit about his background. When he came back from New York, he had been in New York as artistic director of the Pearl Theater Company, which is one of Off-Broadway's finest houses. He won a Drama Desk Award there in 2011. He spent the better part of 7 years out in Utah as the associate artistic director of the Utah Shakespearean Festival, where he directed great productions of Amadeus, Hamlet, Henry V, Glass Menagerie, Romeo and Juliet. And there's a portfolio right there that's quite envious. Some of you may be familiar with Jim from his work as the founding and producing director of the New American Theater in Rockford, Illinois, which for many years was the preeminent professional theater in Western Illinois. And then Jim's regional credits are all over the place, including Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Milwaukee Rep, Art and Theater, Philadelphia, many others. Here in the Chicago area, he has directed at Northlight, Red Orchid, Prop, the Onyx Theater, and many others. And he now has directed 4 shows for the Shakespeare Project of Chicago. Our Elmhurst audience would have been familiar a year ago. We presented Hamlet down there, which Jim directed. And here you can see some of the faces that were in that particular production. The prior year, I think, which would have been our first at Elmhurst, he directed Pericles, Prince of Tyre. And the year before that, he directed As You Like It. And he made his debut with us in 2016 when he directed Henry V. So our conversation tonight is going to touch on actually each of those plays, among many other topics. Now, you may be wondering, you know, when Jim and I sit down to have a discussion about Shakespeare, it's usually over a couple of glasses of wine. And, you know, the conversation can go on for a few hours. So we decided to meet a few weeks ago, and we actually recorded our conversation and edited it down a bit to about 45 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to play that conversation for you now, and then we're going to come back live at the end of it and take your questions. So please submit any questions or comments that you may have into the chat box, and we'll look forward to answering those at the end. So now I'm going to switch gears here just for a second. Bear with me. And we are going to go to our conversation with J.R. Sullivan. 1 second. Let me just go back. And I want to hold on. So you stop that. Just 1 second. All right. Now, here we go. Share computer sound. All right. All right. We'll see you in a little bit. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with J.R. Sullivan. J.R., great to see you. Thanks for joining us for this.
Thank you, Peter.
And I think a good place to begin is a question that I'm always interested in when I'm talking with other people involved with Shakespeare, and that is, what was your very first experience with Shakespeare? How did it come to you? And maybe you could just take us a little bit through your journey in terms of where you started and where you are today.
Sure, yes. Well, my very first was probably not unlike most people's, which in America at least, and that was in school. Sophomore year of English class at Boylan Central Catholic High in Rockford, which is my hometown. And I recall that the plays were Macbeth and Merchant of Venice. And perhaps not surprising given the site of my schooling. But, and I think there was a really mediocre film that came along with the Scottish play or not. But it was not something that made an impression on me beyond the fact that the language was hard to understand. The film was a little more interesting because you could watch them and not have to puzzle it out just with the reading, which I presume is most people's first experience with it when they're 15 years old. Then, though, in college, there was some production work and scene work, but the significant one for me was that at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, I had won by virtue of an audition and my drama professor's sponsorship, a acting internship at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, which had a relationship to Beloit College in Wisconsin. So that while I had a leg up for getting into this, I had to audition for the acting internship, and I got it. And I reported for work. It was a winter-spring semester section. And I reported to work in January for my internship at Milwaukee Rep, my first professional gig, as it turned out. And I got there, and they were in production with As You Like It. And my supervisor there said, "Your first job is to usher, tonight." So I'm ushering people into their seats, and I sit down to watch As You Like It for the first time. I open up the program, and I see that my name is there as understudy to Silvius. Now,
that was the first time you found out. Was in the
first time I found out, and they'd been in production for 2 weeks.
Nice.
Performances for 2 weeks. Now, not only had I never seen a rehearsal or a performance of the play until that night, I had never read As You Like It. I had no idea what it was about. So that was my first experience. Terror, followed quickly the next day by deepened terror when the actor playing Silvius in a workshop game that I was involved in for actors tripped and broke his nose.
Oh boy.
So while everybody was attending to him and his injury, I could only think that, oh my gosh, I'm on stage tonight in a role that I have no idea how to do it. I guess I thought I'd have to go on stage on book, but I didn't know anything about anything, even though I'd seen it the night before. The stage managers took one look at me about a half hour after this class, and And then they realized that the actor who was playing Sylvius would go on that night with a nose brace, which he did. The only Sylvius, I think, in the history of the performances of the play that would have performed with the nose brace. So who knows? So that was it. So, but that production was my first experience. And I think as I saw it time after time after that, A, to know it and be prepared.
Right.
But B, to learn it, to learn what was going on. And the primary thing was that actors who knew what they were saying and knew what they were doing conveyed utter and complete meaning.
Yes.
And that was the case there at Milwaukee Rep. I had no problem understanding the story or what they were saying, or at least the very important sense of what they were saying in action. And that proved to be it. Now, as a director, my first experience with it was at my own theater in Rockford back in the 80s, the New American Theater. We did a production of The Taming of the Shrew. And then subsequent to that, I did a production of As You Like It as a director. I've done it 3 times, actually. Following up finally with a production at Oregon Shakespeare Festival of that play, and about 20 other Shakespeares at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, where I was associate artistic director. So as it turned out, there would be a lot of Shakespeare in my future. That would have been a surprise if some angel had whispered that into my ear in that sophomore English class when I was struggling through Merchant of Venice and Macbeth.
The point you make is so interesting about understanding. The actors understood what they were saying. And I think that's so important, because if the actors do understand what they're saying, it's so much more likely that the audience is going to understand.
Absolutely. That's the case all the time. I mean, I think there clearly have been productions of all plays where people sometimes fake it if they don't quite understand it, what they're doing, and feel too ashamed or embarrassed, to admit that, when they're working on it. No reason for that, for gosh sakes. But that can be the case sometimes. And I think Shakespeare, unfortunately, in cartoons, and Looney Tunes, has sometimes been the image of something that's sort of false and grand.
Right.
Which works against the kind of purposeful realism that is most often the hallmark, of American acting and great American storytelling. Right. So it became, I think, for people who hadn't seen enough of it done well, the image of something that was phony.
Right.
And while we know that nothing should be farther from the case, that did, plant the idea that it's not real enough to be respected.
Yeah. One of the comments that I always feel so good about at the Shakespeare Project after our performances, when audience members will come up to us and say things like, gee, thanks for updating the language. I really understood it.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, we don't change anything.
Yes.
But they couldn't believe that they actually, watched the performance and actually understood it. And I think that kind of goes back sometimes to what you mentioned earlier, which was maybe their first exposure, perhaps in a high school English class, when they were forced to take a book home and read it and really couldn't make head nor tail of it.
Yes, and it's nothing against the good nun, who was teaching our English class. In fact, she was one of my favorite teachers. But it was a lack on our part, I think, of willing to give it a chance and falling into some sort of general attitude about it, which, to be rebellious at that age is no news to anybody. And this was an easy thing to rebel against. But, that thing about understanding the languages, I can recall, this was about 35 years ago, I did a production of The Man for All Seasons, which is about Thomas More, of course, and in Henry VIII's court. And I guess because they were wearing, Tudor costume and speaking in a mildly heightened language, it's Robert Bolt's script.
Right.
an audience member came up to me on opening night after the show and said, I never used to be able to understand Shakespeare, and this time I did. So I realized that maybe sometimes it's the mere presence of tights and a tutor or a waistcoat or something that implies that it's Shakespearean.
Yeah.
But it is a thing to see that look of absolute delight in an audience member's eyes when they've understood it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They feel like the clouds have cleared or something. Right. That there's a sense of, I get it. And I think for all of us that have worked in that language as young actors or as students, it's the practice of it. It's the doing of it and doing of it and doing of it that suddenly something clicks. Right. And your respect for the language and the form, its style, and the uses of the poetry suddenly coalesce in the mind and cohere. And it's a revelation. It's a breakthrough.
You've directed 4 shows for the Shakespeare Project, which we're so lucky to have you as one of our regular directors. And you've worked in every one of Shakespeare's genre. You directed As You Like It, Henry V.
Again.
Yeah, again.
That's the 4th one. I forgot about that. Yes.
That's right. You also directed Pericles, which is a romance. And, of course, this past October, you did such a great job for us with Hamlet. Talk a little bit about, as a director, how do you approach each of these genres? Why don't we start with As You Like It, in terms of comedy? How do you, what is your, takeoff point in terms of a director when you're working in comedy?
Well, connection, is everything. I mean, and language is going to be a part of every one of these touch points, with the different genres, or touchstone, should I say? If you pardon the expression. But the quality of the language is different in each genre, and how he uses it naturally. And connection and the energy, the buoyancy of the language was paramount for As You Like It. Mm-hmm. A play that largely takes place out of doors, of course, in the Forest of Arden. And I used to, if you'll recall, I used to like to point out to the actors that there's an extra energy and buoyancy to language, to all of our speech when we're out of doors. It's that awareness that to be clearly heard and heard above whatever ambient noise there is, we give our language an extra energetic thrust, bounce, energy. And all of that completely helps comedy in Shakespeare. But then we have to remember that this was language written to be performed out of doors. It was out of doors at the Globe Theater. In fact, As You Like It may very well have been the very play that opened the Globe Theater in 1599. And James Shapiro believes that. Yep. So the writer about Shakespeare, the Shakespearean writer, James Shapiro. And so it's built in, and I think that's the other thing about Shakespeare that one has to marvel at, which is he's completely in tune with what's needed in the moment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And As You Like It is any comedy, is a hallmark of any comedy is an energized connection to the audience that is seeing it, because their responses to it are part of the rhythm of performing it. Mm-hmm. Without them responding, the energy of the performance itself changes. And so Shakespeare, knowing that, has a great deal of direct address to the audience. In all of these plays, he does this, of course, but especially constantly and sometimes surprisingly in the comedies. And that's a quality that affects the language and rhythm of the work at large, as well as individual moments. And it just makes good comic sense to connect to that and one to another on stage and make a character of the audience who are, in As You Like It, should be seen as sitting in the Forest of Arden with us as we perform. rather than something removed, something that's cold, something that's not connected to them. So I think that aspect to the language and As You Like It in a Shakespearean comedy is important. There's also differences among the different comedies. Mm-hmm. And there was a change in the style of comedy after Much Ado About Nothing and going to As You Like It, which we know had to do with the change of the principal clown in the play, the actor playing that clown. Shakespeare had a remarkable company, clearly, that he wrote for. That was a kind of shorthand for his writing, which in no small degree accounts for the enormous output, of his writing. How could he have written so many plays, specifically in like a 10 to 12 year period, when there were 4 a year? Yeah. Well, writing to a specific company helps that. And so, Kemp is his Fool, and Much Ado About Nothing, and all the comedies before that had a certain style, a knockabout, rustic style. Robert Armin, who was the Fool in the comic Fool and As You Like It, and the plays after that, had a certain comic style, and he could sing well. Mm-hmm. Renowned for his singing. So suddenly songs appeared in all of these plays. Right. So, but that changed the quality and style of it to a degree, which for Shakespeare was fitting the words to the actor and the actor's personality and gave them such truth. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Now, what we have to do, director and actors, is fit then that to our persons and personalities so that it can still ring as true now as it did then. And the fact that it does, when it's performed well, is testament to this remarkable insight that Shakespeare has into human behavior.
Well, I was lucky to be a part of your production of As You Like It here at the Shakespeare Project several years ago, and I think many of our audience members that are tuning in tonight may have seen it as well. And there was one thing that you did in that which was just so wonderful. You mentioned that you had directed it at Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Right, Oregon.
And you went out and you went back and got hold of the property people over there and got hold of all of those love sonnets, had them shipped over here. And then basically, was it Rosalind who handed them out to the audience members, who then became the trees in the Forest of Arden?
Yeah.
Which, again, we don't do a lot of theatricality at the project, but things like that I just thought was just brilliant.
One of the things that I think an audience really wants to know is that they matter. They matter beyond the buying of the ticket or just the being there, and they matter certainly in a comedy. We can't get to the next moment without you responding, or at least if things deflate, but to literally matter to the extent that you're in the play, with them. And that when Orlando's poems are referred to as being on all the trees in the Forest of Arden, and then all our audience members sort of lifted them up. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it worked better than I thought it would.
And it was also one of those examples of how much theater is the group experience.
Yeah.
Right? Where by doing that, they really became part of the action in a way. We
do it together, yes.
They became the trees in the forest.
That's what we're missing right now, frankly.
That was exactly what I was going to say. This format here is like, TV or film, but it's no substitute for what we share as a community when we're together in the theater. Not only the actors among themselves, but also the audience members and both of those units doing something together.
No question. There's the fact of that is true, but also the act of it is true, because we know that there is an electrical energy going on in performance, a give and take, an exchange, a back and forth that's very real. And we know it, of course, absolutely in a comedy. If they don't laugh, it's a tragedy.
Right.
But it's a fact of performance, and that's what it gives it that that bounce, that energy.
So moving on to let's take a look at the history plays, and of course you directed Henry V for us. Mm-hmm. Very different play from As You Like It. Mm-hmm. talk to us a little bit about your approach to that play.
Well, ultimately, I think the most important thing to achieve in direction is clarity of everything. And that starts in the casting, but it carries through in the rehearsal and with the moment-to-moment action of the play. So clarity rings the bell. So it's my clock.
Yeah. Okay.
So the history plays are a challenge because while all of that is the news of the court, so to speak, to the audience seeing it in 1599, Henry V being another play from that year. Even if it was history of 100 or so years back, it was their history. It was in their chronicles. It was in their mythology. Mm-hmm. It was all well known for our audiences. Who are all these people? And what is going on? It's very challenging. Keeping the batting order clear, and who's on which team. In this case, the White Rose and the white team or red team, and then the issues and the clarity. Now, Henry V is such a theatrical play. We're helped by how Shakespeare conceived it, mm-hmm. which practically is as a performance. He was never divorced from where the play was happening. And the true fact of its performance, which is that it is a performance. So Henry V, starting with chorus, mm-hmm. a single actor, talking directly to the assembled mm-hmm. about how inadequate this play is when it comes to staging battle scenes and all the rest, because. In any performance of Henry V, Henry is invading France with about 10 people. Mm-hmm. And he wins the war. He wins the Battle of Agincourt and wins the war. So the sheer theatricality of it is approached first. But clarity. Keeping all of the issues of the play as clear as possible and doing things. I mean, Shakespeare, he writes it in. There were no sets, in his time. There are no sets for our performances with the Shakespeare Project. There are often very minimal sets and usually most successful full productions of it. But so actors are always walking on, A, saying where they are, and B, who they're talking to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Buckingham, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So it helps the audience's eye and ear as to what's going on, but you've got to make that clear. And especially since almost all contemporary productions double and triple cast people.
Yes.
Because in order to even do these plays. Mm-hmm. So following Shakespeare's lead on who, what, when, and where with extra emphasis and everybody being clued into that on the stage, so that the audience is helped, and they're helped along. And once that is done, there's no resistance to going with you, on it from an audience, because they know we are purposely engaging them on terms that they can not only understand but energetically participate in.
I think the history plays were extremely popular during Shakespeare's time. The audience. They brought, quite a bit of knowledge of some of these stories of the kings,
right?
From literature, and yet when Shakespeare brings the play into the theater, all of a sudden now it's happening in the here and now.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it too for me was that, and everybody I think that works on these plays, is they realize that they're less about history,
right,
and more about the question of power.
Yeah,
and the perils of power, perils of ambition, the perils of pride. Mm-hmm. And that made it all contemporary for his audience. Many were very nervous about what would happen to England, because here Queen Elizabeth was an aging monarch without an heir. And as depicted in all of these history plays, there was all this, sanguinary history of the cost to the land, of these struggles for power between families.
Right.
Not so much factions, as we're going through in a divided America, but families. Mm-hmm. Who would most successfully emerge on top, after these skirmishes, and at what cost to the country that these things were. So he made them about power and that question, and that even comes into the tragedies, of course, but certainly in the histories. And that, I think, is why a play like Henry IV, Part 1, who is often regarded as the greatest of all of his plays, certainly a favorite among many people, is that it might be my favorite Shakespeare play. Mm-hmm. Although I would say my favorite is whatever one I'm working on at the time. Right. But less about dates and places, like the difficult history teachers we had also in high school, right. And more about what the contemporary issue was in 1599, or in our case, when we do them now, how does it connect to these very same questions, which are the questions we face in 2020? Yep.
2 years ago, you directed one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and one of his last plays as well, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, which falls into this romance group that comprised the final playwriting chapter of his career. Give us a few reflections on Pericles.
Yes, that was a great experience for me, and my only experience with Pericles, other than seeing it only twice before in many, many years removed between viewings. But I thought first off, what was so astonishing about that part of his career was the conscious shift in direction and genre. I mean, one could say, because all the romances are experiments, as it were. Mm-hmm. And one could say, well, for the writer who's brilliant at comedy, Twelfth Night, mm-hmm. brilliant at tragedy, Hamlet, supremely wondrous plays, at the very top of the list, of any list, of great drama in all of Western civilization. Why would you abandon that and then do this completely other genre? And that's a mystery. We don't know. We can make speculations on it, like I've done that. I'd like to try this. Or I'm aware that there's a new taste, in our audience. I think that has much more to do with it. I'd like to write to that taste and see if I can take the new preferences and transform them into something transcendent. And he certainly approached that in all of these romances. There are transcendent moments in Pericles, as there are in Winter's Tale. And most of the transcendent moments involve reunions with family who thought they were lost to each other. Father and daughter in Pericles, husband and wife in The Winter's Tale, to name but two. They also involve regret, contrition, and a renewal, a resurrection, of spirit, of soul, of spirit, and of heart. And coming home again is involved, I think, in all of them. Pericles has a kind of Homer's Odyssey quality to it, as Pericles wanders, the Mediterranean. Yep. And Winter's Tale is another, rejection from court, flight into the forest, into Bohemia, in that case, like As You Like It was, and then a return afterwards. So after a time of penance, there is ennobling grace. And the idea of forgiveness is in both, especially in Winter's Tale, especially in Pericles. All the romances, there's forgiveness involved, and I think that leads to a profound insight about how we help one another, how we resurrect one another, and save one another.
Well, I think that is exactly what I recall from our production at that time 2 years ago. As you well remember, we had a very good friend, Fred Stone, who was very ill at that time, and who was supposed to be in Pericles up until about 4 or 5 weeks before he had to drop out, and he was dying, and the afternoon of, I believe it was the second or third rehearsal, it might have been the second one, you came from the hospital where he had just passed away, and it was a very devastating time for all of us who knew and loved Fred so much. And I just recall, it would have been so easy at that point for someone to say, let's all go to a bar, let's not rehearse tonight, let's do something else. But you did exactly what all of us, what I felt to be such a blessing, which was let's rehearse this play. And the ability to just throw yourself completely into that world. And the world of Pericles is, as you said, a world that was an emotional roller coaster all of its own. Yes. And, there are people who die in this play. There are people who are miraculously born. And we were going through those same tribulations at that time in our life. And it's something that I will always be so grateful to you for your wisdom and bravery of leading our little band of actors through that very, very difficult time. And
we were all in that together. Thank you, Peter. But we were all in that together, and we all felt, Fred with us. And if Fred had been in that room as an actor, and it happened to someone else equally close to him and all of us, that's what he would have wanted. Yeah. We are the purveyors of life. We are, we seek to recreate life at every moment of this work. From the dry page, to vibrant, living human experience. And in that sense, it's eternal. In that sense, it goes well beyond us. It came to us from a long, long line of our forebears in this work. Whether we do it as artists or whether we're readers of it and audiences for it. There were all those people, all those human beings who keep this work alive. And we are, like Shaw has said, it's our privilege to have a hold of that torch for a short time, our brief time, and to hold it up for our brief time and make sure we pass it on in the future and in good working order, condition. So it's a privilege to do that. And I know that's what Fred would have wanted. And that certainly was the right thing.
It absolutely was. And then it brings us now to Hamlet, which was last October, but it actually seems like about 10 years ago.
I know, doesn't it? I know.
The greatest play of Shakespeare is probably the greatest play of all time. And again, we kicked off our 25th anniversary season with that play, and we're so, again, lucky to have you. Share with us a few of your favorite nuggets about Hamlet.
Hamlet is, it's about everything. Yeah. It's literally about everything. It's Beethoven. It's Michelangelo. It's Raphael. It's everything. It's got everything in it, and it's so completely, utterly true. And again, it starts, from that base of this is theater. That is a true thing. Mm-hmm. It's almost as though it's almost as though he's saying to the audience, right at the beginning of everything, like he did with Henry V. And this gives credence, in fact, to the idea that Hamlet was at least started in the same year that Henry V happened, because this approach was on Shakespeare's mind. But it's as if he's saying to the audience, and I know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. We're actors, you're audience members. We're pretending to be this in order to tell the story. Right. And if we do that well, and once that bond is made, there's no end to where imagination can take you, and it becomes truer than true. It becomes the deeper truth, the core truth of all these things. And the core truth in Hamlet, it's filled with, it's like there are two plays, and it's two plays. It's the revenge tragedy story, but it's also these 5 amazing soliloquies, the inner life of the character. And that process of inner life, those soliloquies, is more or less a Shakespearean invention. I mean, Marlowe certainly had a lot of it, but not to the extent and to the depth and to the completion that Shakespeare used it as. And so you get Hamlet, who never lies to us in those soliloquies. No Shakespearean character lies to an audience in their soliloquies, except one, Iago.
Mm-hmm.
And then the revenge tragedy, which is more or less a kind of run-of-the-mill revenge tragedy, and it's got all the melodramatic stuff in it. It's got incest, it's got sex, it's got fratricide, it's got all that, which would have compelled an audience to pay attention. But the other thing with it, with rueful, meditative philosophizing and inquiry about the nature of existence, of what it means to live. And why do we live? Wedded to that revenge tragedy, lifted into some powerful place that still astonishes, and in any form that you watch it in. So and of course it's a long play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I said it has everything in it. It has everything in it. So there's a lot of time. And if you were to do everything, like say Kenneth Branagh did in his 90s film of it, it's more than 4 hours long.
Right.
So that taxes a modern audience, and is probably not necessary to do all of that anymore, and still have the essence of things in that play. And notice that in that play, a lot of the truths of it are delivered via actors. There is the play within the play, the mousetrap that Shakespeare has Hamlet have his actor friends from Elsinore, from Wittenberg rather, put together at Elsinore. When I did the play at the Utah Shakespeare Festival about 15 years ago, a very traditional approach to Shakespeare there, usually, certainly back then. And so I said, well, I'd like to try something new, I said to the producer, and he let me go on it because I'd done a few very successful plays. I guess he thought he had to. I had the actors who were playing the acting company, in Hamlet, actually on stage assembling the platform for the performance while the audience came in. They were clearly a touring company. They were seemingly what they are in Hamlet, a touring group, itinerant group of players who happened upon this place, didn't quite know exactly where they were. In fact, when we got to the point of making the pre-show announcement to the audience, about turning off cell phones and this and that, the audience would see an usher walk up the ramp to the player king, who was leading the setup of the stage for our Hamlet, to handing him a piece of paper, whispering something to him, and he stepped forward and he said, "Well, they would like me to make this announcement." And he read from the paper those things that we normally hear, before a performance about, unwrap your candies now and turn off your cell phones and things like that. But what I wanted, it was a kind of a gimmick, but it was also aligned to the idea of what's really going on here. This is a performance, and if we do something cleverly, like I hope this was, a kind of deepened agreement goes on between the audience and us on the stage. That, all right, go with that. Let's see where you can take me. And that's our responsibility at that point, to take them to new places. But I like that about it. And I think Shakespeare is such a man of the theater, an actor himself, when he started, clearly, and by the evidence, what little evidence we have, that he understood that the most important thing that has to happen is a ongoing direct connection with the audience.
Absolutely. Jim, I just have a few other questions for you today. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about, as a director, How do you approach casting Shakespeare, and how does your approach in casting differ than, let's say, casting a modern play?
Well, beyond the things that are, of course, similar, like chemistry between people, or perceived chemistry, and with Shakespeare's plays, it's everything is about the language, and I don't necessarily mean knowing it fully, or that sense of knowing it fully, because anybody can know it, by virtue of just doing a little bit of the homework. And there's, any collection of the plays give you a glossary, on that. But knowing it in the sense of using the poetry, the rhythm of the language, having a sense and applying that specifically to help you with it, and to give it that buoyancy and drive and energy that's so necessary to it. And I think an affinity for that is the most important thing. If I am in present, to that, that's exciting, and it's also an actor that you want to work with. And that means that the actor is embracing that as potential and possibility to unlock himself or herself with the beauty and power of this. It's all dramatic. It's all forceful. It all drives to the end of the line. Mm-hmm. It always hands off to the other actor, the next actor. Even in the soliloquies, there's a handoff, I think, with the audience, because they are in effect an actor with you in these plays. So it's that. It's not having a Shakespearean voice, as is often rightly mocked. It's having an affinity for and a sense of the musicality, rhythm, and drive of the blank verse.
It sounds like what you're saying, to a certain extent, is really owning that language, right?
Yeah, if you're going to sing a song, if you're trying out for a musical, you've got to do the same thing. You've got to own that music and that language within the music. It's the same thing. Yeah. I think. You can't do it half-heartedly. You can't do it apologetically. Right. You can't try to fake it.
Yeah, it sounds like there's an inherent confidence too in those actors that are able.
Oh, I think, and desire.
Yeah, desire
for it. Because we don't often get to do Shakespeare all that often, because it's very expensive to do. It's hard to do. There are fewer and fewer actors who are trained adequately for it. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity, and certainly not one to squander.
Yep. Well, that's great. And I just wanted to finish off with this particular question. There are some people who argue today that Shakespeare is no longer relevant. How could someone who lived over 400 years ago possibly have any insight into what's going on today in the world? What do you say to people that have that very narrow view, perhaps, of his relevancy today?
Well, I think that's represents an opinion seeking to kind of sidestep it a little bit, or our time is so different from his time. Time itself is different in our time from his time. Yeah. When I often, standing at the doorway of a theater as an audience goes in, I'll often hear one of a partner of a couple going in, clearly not as keen on being there as the other is, sometimes saying something like, "Now, how long is this?" With just that tone. And there's an assumption that if it's long, and it's all Shakespeare is assumed to be long, and I'm sure that much of it has sometimes seemed too long. To me, it has seemed too long. It's this use of time that's of a concern. Because it's not, as we were saying about the history plays, the fact that they're wearing the clothes of another time, if in fact they're even doing that. You can do any of these plays in contemporary dress. Right. But if they're doing that, is not to say that they are stuck in that time. And if the play doesn't live in both times, the time of its writing and our time, which is the most important time in any theater production for that production to succeed, then it doesn't deserve to be on stage in the first place. Mm-hmm. So making sure that these productions have a footing in our own time by virtue of what is emphasized and how it's performed and the energy with which it's performed and the conception from which it comes from for that performance is everything. And then that won't be said by someone who sees it. But the question of dismissing it before even giving it a shot, assuming that it lacks relevance, is the deeper concern. I would also say that we live in a time where language is actually achieving an increasing importance and relevance. Consider the rhythmic passion and power behind hip hop. Mm-hmm. And more than one person has pointed out that Shakespeare's language, which also deals in rhythm, yep, and also makes use of rhyme, mm-hmm, for emphasis, and musicality, was also the language of the street in his time. So we are connected to that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's then incumbent upon those of us who are doing it to make sure that that language sings.
Yes.
That it sings with passion and it sings with purpose. So the question of relevance is off the table. His subject matter is all relevant. Mm-hmm. Because it's all entirely about the human experience and the human condition. And he takes us through all the major events of life. Mm-hmm. Birth, mm-hmm, youth, love, mature love, murderous passion, death. He takes us through all of that, all the great events of our life. Mm-hmm. And his insight about it is astonishing. So that is all entirely, relevant because it's now. We just have to make sure that it plays like now, and make sure that the door is open for that.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Shakespeare is the greatest writer in our language, right? And I mean, he created so many words that we just use colloquial today, and phrases and things like that we don't even know. He doesn't get enough credit, I think, sometimes for how much of an influence he had on our language. Yeah, and I think
such an understanding of sound for him.
Yes. Yeah.
What sound? What sound? How sound works? And the sonic quality, to speech in the theater.
Which emphasizes again the fact that he was really written to be performed, right? First, mm-hmm, and foremost, because you can imagine something that sounds like that in your head, but to hear it and to feel it from a living person in front of you, that's a completely different experience.
Yes.
So, well, great. Well, Jim, this has been a great time with you. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait until we're able to get the Shakespeare Project back in our libraries again, doing live performances, getting you back directing with us again. Again, we will definitely look forward to that. But I
happily be there.
But I just want to thank you again for spending some time with our audience tonight. And we'll look forward to questions now, which I'm hopeful some of you may have out there in the audience. So, again, thanks, Jim, and we'll talk to you in just a minute. Okay, I think we're back live now, and Jez, we'll turn it over to you to throw some questions out to Jim.
Okay, so if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in either the chat or the Q&A. We don't have anything just yet. We'll give people a moment.
Sure. All right.
And while you think about that, I'm also going to put up this quick poll. If you can just tell us how many people are watching on your screen so that we can get some better statistics.
think, Peter, you should have interrupted me more often. I think I went on too long and many of those answers, far too long. I was a little embarrassed watching it.
I don't know. I think you did just fine.
If you're not sure where to put the questions either, we did have that mentioned the other day. It's probably at the bottom of your screen. There's a toolbar. If you may move your mouse around it, it's probably the bottom of your screen or the top. And you can click on either of the buttons that looks like a talking bubble. Looks like we might have one here. We have a question, is there a Shakespeare play that haunts you, good or bad?
I think the ones that haunt me are the ones I felt I didn't do a good job on. That really haunts me. They're like ghosts in the night. But you know, I think I can never stop thinking about Hamlet, for one. It has meant different things to me at different points in my life, which just goes to demonstrate how brilliant it is about life itself, about all things that confront us in life. So I find that as I grow older, there are new things about it that rush to the foreground. So I guess that would be one. I think about A Winter's Tale an awful lot as well. And I would say those two.
We have a question from John here. Has any company ever done the plays in the order that they were written?
Well, that would be interesting. I don't know of any. I know of companies that have been devoted to doing the entire canon. Utah Shakespeare Festival has been about that over the last 15 years. They made a specific point of doing all the history plays in the chronological order of the events in history. So beginning with King John in that sequence. But other than the BBC's Shakespeare project in the late 70s and 80s when they filmed all of the plays for television. So that was a concerted effort to do the entire canon. But I don't know any other companies that have done them all, other than companies like Oregon Shakespeare Festival, for instance, that have been around for 50 plus years.
Have you ever directed Titus Andronicus?
Have not. That would be a challenge. I think Titus Andronicus certainly has the largest body count of murders of all the plays. It's very melodramatic. It was an early play of Shakespeare's, and you can tell that. It's a kind of apprentice work. But it has many of the motifs that he would develop in later plays, which makes it interesting by itself. But no, I have not done Titus. I'd like to do it because it would be a challenge to a melodramatic sequence of making each gruesome murder more interesting than the last one in poetry.
Yeah, it's fun to look at Titus Andronicus, like you said, Jim, as an early playwriting effort of Shakespeare. It's a revenge tragedy, right? And he really didn't spare anything in terms of the blood and the guts. I think he wanted to kind of make a splash, so to speak. But then you can read Titus Andronicus or see it and then compare that to Hamlet, which is also a revenge tragedy, several years later, and just marvel at the maturity of his writing and the way that he presents character, I think, as well. It's a really good to look at those two plays, one against the other.
No question.
How do you handle the songs in the plays? Are there any standardized tunes for those?
There are. You can find music for them, or transpositions of the music. They're folk tunes, from your Elizabethan folk music, which isn't particularly compelling, I have to say. Maybe my musical ear is not attuned to it. I like it, but I have found it to be difficult to use in the shows that have called for it. So I usually have had them jazzed up a little bit, if you'll pardon that musical term. In the As You Like It we did with the Shakespeare Project a couple of years back, for instance, which is filled with songs. We had a remarkable singer, songwriter, Megan McDonough, join us for that show and composed original music for them and sang most of the songs. And that was very compelling. So I have tended to look at it that way in shows that have asked for it. But the use of music in the plays is by itself, very interesting. And like I said, he might have been writing to a taste at the time for it or a new demand for it, but it only helps contemporary productions of it. Modern audiences certainly look forward to that.
I can ask this of both of you. Is there any show that you have not yet done that you would like to do?
Well, actually, one that I'm very interested in, I'll let Jim think about that for a second because I'm sure he has more than one. But one that we are actually going to tee up for this season, which of course we can't do now, but is still will be on, I think, the docket for when we do get back in the libraries. I'm very interested in this play, Timon of Athens. I think that particular character is one that is certainly very problematic for some people, but it's a play that I think has a number of interesting different dimensions to it. I've never been in it. I haven't directed it. I'm probably more interested right now at being in it. And it's a play that we've only done, I believe, one time in our 25 years of the Shakespeare Project. So I'm kind of interested in getting having another look at that play.
Yeah, in Shakespeare's canon, I'm very keen on doing A Winter's Tale. I've never done that play, and I very much would like to, dive into it. So I would say that, and I'd love to take another stab at Henry IV, Part 1. And I'm always ready to do Hamlet again, for sure.
Have you done any work with Shakespeare's sonnets?
I haven't, other than to read them and reread them again and again. That's another example of something that has changed over time. From here, the sonnets stay the same, but I change, and my perceptions of the windows that I look through, with that language, I find myself looking through new windows and on new views and new landscapes. So he doesn't change, but I change, and as a consequence, the whole experience is new. There have been very good stagings of the sonnets, but they're fundamentally not dramatic. They're like letters addressed to someone, a young nobleman, a patron, a lover, and they're very intimate that way. And in that sense, they have worked as soliloquies or very intimate, very personal things. And I have seen, renditions of that were quite good, but I myself haven't done any of those for the stage, but I've certainly loved reading them, from the page.
What was your first Shakespeare for acting, and then your first one for directing?
Well, I guess the first acting has to be that Crazy Sylvia's thing at Milwaukee Repertory Theater. But that was only in my mind. I mean, I never even got to do a run through of that play. So I guess after that, it was my college professor, Kirk Denmark at Beloit College in Wisconsin. He had put together an evening that involved a large part of Troilus and Cressida. And I played Hector in that. So that was perhaps my first acting experience. The first directing experience was this Tammy of the Shrew, which I had done in the mid-'80s in Rockford, Illinois.
If you did not see in the chat earlier, you do have someone here who went to Beloit with you.
Oh, I think that's John Schimberg. Is that right? Oh, if you're still on, John, hello, how are you? I got a mention of the old alma mater in there.
right, any other questions? Give you all a moment to think about it. Peter, do you have any plans to do a Zoom production?
Right. So the only thing we're going to do via Zoom right now is the film that we'll be showing in April. I'm not really a very big fan of doing plays via Zoom. I think they're very taxing for the audience. There's a kind of fatigue that sets in, trying to figure out who's who. You know, everyone is a little bit different. You put 16 little different boxes on the screen. It really, I think, begins to have a sort of diminishing returns of benefit. And the other part is this: is that, you know, what Jim, the point that Jim was making earlier, which is there's no substitute for theater. We have to be together in the same place. And I think sometimes when you see these plays, all it does is remind you how miserable our current condition is and how badly we want to get back into the theater. So that's why I decided to do the film, because the film is really good for this platform. You can sit down and we're used to looking at a screen. We're used to being by ourselves or with one other person looking at the screen. So that's why I hope we're going to turn this thing around, and everybody's going to do what they need to do to stay safe and to beat this thing as a global community, and be able to get back to doing theater sooner than later.
When we are able to go back, what plays can we look forward to in that season?
Right. Well, the one that we're going to open with is the play that we were not able to do in May. So that's Measure for Measure. That's the first show that we've ever had to cancel in our 25 years, and I made a decision at that time to say, when this thing is over, we're going to open with Measure for Measure. And to be honest with you, when this happened back in March, I honestly thought we would be doing that play this month. I really did. And it's very, very disappointing that we are in the state that we're in right now. So we're going to do Measure for Measure. I think we're going to do Time in Athens. Jim and I had talked about him possibly directing a Ben Jonson play, a comedy called Volpone. And then we'll throw in one other play, which I don't know right now, but it's going to be a great season of very different plays, and something that I'm sure everyone is going to look forward to when we're able to do it.
Yes, definitely. We will be interested in seeing that and hope it's not too long from now.
That's right. Yes, I see John's comment, Two Noble Kinsmen. That's one we've only done one time, and obviously, Jim, that might have a certain appeal for you for some reason.
Yeah, that would. I mean, that's sort of a mystery, that play, you know, as far as I mean, attributed to Shakespeare, probably is, certainly, or probably has written in collaboration with another writer. They often did that then, but sure, yeah. I thought for a minute he was talking about you and me, Peter.
All right, I don't see any more questions at the moment. Thank you both for your time. This was very interesting.
Well, thank you, Jez, and thanks to everybody at the Elmhurst Public Library and everybody that tuned in tonight. Great discussion. I'm glad you were in for it, and stay safe and be well.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Mm-hmm.